In the 7th year after Kelly Schmidt and I built our art auction empire together, she threw me the most elaborate anniversary dinner of our marriage. Yet I couldn't taste a single bite of the expensive wine or gourmet meal, because hidden under her loving smile, I knew she was planning to steal everything and run away with my twin brother Blake Stone. But instead of confronting her or breaking down in rage, I smiled back and toasted to our bright future together. Because I had already died once before. You see, in my previous life, I was Grant Shotha, naive husband, who discovered the affair too late, lost everything in a bitter divorce, and died alone and broken while watching my brother marry the woman I'd loved for a decade. But fate gave me a second chance, and this time I knew exactly how their betrayal would unfold. This time, I had a different plan. This time I would become someone else entirely and steal away the one thing Blake treasured most, his fiancée, Beatrice Croft. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows. Across the mahogany dining table of our penthouse, overlooking downtown Millbrook Heights, Kelly had outdone herself tonight. Roses imported from Ecuador, my favorite lobster thermidor, and a bottle of 1982 Bordeaux that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Everything was perfect, down to the soft jazz playing in the background. And the way she'd styled her auburn hair in those loose waves I used to love running my fingers through. To 7 beautiful years, Kelly raised her glass, her emerald eyes sparkling with what anyone else would mistake for pure adoration, and to many more adventures ahead. I clinked my glass against hers, studying the way her smile didn't quite reach those eyes. To adventures, I agreed, taking a slow sip while watching her over the rim. I have a feeling things are about to get very ... interesting. Kelly's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around her wine glass. I hadn't known what I was looking for. I might have missed it, but I caught every micro-expression, every telltale way she glanced toward her purse. The slight tremor in her voice when she mentioned the future. The nervous habit of touching her pearl necklace when she was about to lie. Grant, darling. She began, setting down her glass with practiced elegance. I've been thinking about us, about the gallery, about everything we've built together. Here it comes, I thought, maintaining my warm smile while my heart remained completely steady. My previous life, this exact conversation had destroyed me. Tonight it felt like watching a movie I'd already seen, predictable, almost boring. In its familiarity, Shaw and Schmidt, Fine Arts has exceeded every projection this quarter, she continued, her voice taking on that business tone she used when she wanted to sound serious. The Monet acquisition alone brought in $12 million, but I think... She paused, letting her fingers trace the rim of her glass. I think we need to discuss restructuring our partnership. I leaned back in my chair, appearing relaxed while my mind cataloged every detail. The way she'd positioned herself closer to the door, how she'd made sure the legal documents were in her purse, could see the corner of the manila envelope peeking out. Even her dress tonight was strategic. The navy Chanel suit that made her look authoritative, professional. She'd planned this conversation like a military operation. Restructuring? I asked, with just the right amount of curiosity. What did you have in mind? Kelly's smile became more genuine now, probably because she thought she was successfully manipulating. Me? Well, I've been speaking with some investors, including Blake. The question slipped out so casually that Kelly nearly choked on her wine. For a split second, her mask slipped completely. I saw the flash of panic, quickly replaced by confusion. Then a too bright laugh. Blake, your brother. Why would he be involved in our business discussions? I shrugged, carving a piece of lobster with deliberate precision. Just curious. You two seemed to have quite the conversation at the Rothwell Foundation gala last month. Very ... intense discussion by the sculpture garden. Kelly's face went pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. She recovered quickly. I had to give her credit for that. In my past life, her acting skills had completely fooled me. Oh, that, she waved dismissively. He was asking about investment opportunities. You know how Blake is always looking for? The next big thing. Yes, I knew exactly how Blake was. My identical twin had spent our entire lives competing with me, trying to prove he was the better Shaw brother. When we were kids, he'd sabotage my science projects, steal my answers during exams, even seduce my high school girlfriend just to prove he could. Our parents had always brushed it off as healthy sibling rivalry, never seeing the calculated cruelty beneath Blake's charming exterior. "Speaking of Blake," I said, watching Kelly's reaction carefully, "isn't he getting married soon?" "So that? Art curator from the Metropolitan. Beatrice something." "Beatrice Croft," Kelly replied automatically, then caught herself. "I mean, yes, I think that's her name." "Why?" "Why indeed?" Because Beatrice Croft was going to be the key to everything. Because while Kelly and Blake were planning their betrayal of me, they had no idea I was planning something far more elegant. Something that would give me everything I'd lost and take away everything they thought they'd gained. "Just making conversation," I said mildly. "It'll be nice to have family get-togethers again. 4 of us could double date." Kelly's laugh sounded forced. "That would be lovely." The rest of dinner passed in a surreal dance of false pleasantries and hidden agendas. Kelly kept steering the conversation back to business restructuring, probably trying to soften me up for whatever legal ambush she had planned. I played along, asking thoughtful questions about her new vision for the gallery, all while knowing that her vision involved gutting our partnership agreement and running off with both my life's work and my brother. When she excused herself, to powder her nose really, to make a hushed phone call to Blake, confirming that everything was proceeding according to plan, I sat alone at our anniversary table and felt that nothing but cold satisfaction. In my previous life, I would have been devastated by now. The Grant Shaw who'd built Shaw and Schmidt from nothing, who'd loved Kelly with everything he had, who trusted his twin brother despite years of evidence that Blake was incapable of loyalty. That man had died of a heart attack at 35. Alone in a studio apartment, watching news coverage of Blake and Kelly's engagement party, but death, it seemed, was an excellent teacher. It showed you exactly who people really were when they thought you couldn't fight back. It revealed the truth beneath years of lies and manipulation. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, it gave you a chance to rewrite the story entirely. Kelly returned from her call with renewed confidence, probably having received Blake's reassurance that everything was proceeding perfectly. She had no idea that her perfect plan had one fatal flaw. She was executing it against a man who had already lived through her betrayal once before. "So," she said, settling back into her chair with predatory grace, "about that restructuring." I smiled and poured myself another glass of wine. "I'm all ears, darling. Tell me everything." Let me take you back to where it all began, 10 years ago. In a cramped coffee shop near the University of Westbridge's art history department. I was 25, fresh out of my master's program in art authentication, with nothing but a drowning student loan debt and an obsessive passion for Renaissance paintings. Kelly Schmidt was the brilliant doctoral candidate who could identify a Caravaggio brushstroke from across a dimly lit auction house. With honey-colored hair that caught the afternoon light streaming through the cafe windows, she was broke to surviving. On ramen noodles and library vending machine coffee, while writing her dissertation on forged impressionist works. When I found her that Tuesday afternoon, hunched over a stack of art catalogs with tears streaming down her face, my heart cracked open. Her laptop had crashed, taking 3 months of research with it, and her advisor was threatening to drop her from the program. "I can't lose this," she whispered, her voice breaking as she stared at the blank screen. "This degree is everything to me. It's my only way out." I spent the next 72 hours rebuilding her research from scratch. I called in every favor I had, accessed university databases I wasn't authorized to use, even drove 6 hours to Princeton to photograph documents from their private collection. When I handed her the recovered files perfectly organized and cross-referenced, she looked at me like I'd hung the moon. "Grant Shaw," she said, her emerald eyes bright with unshed tears. "You just saved my entire future." That was the beginning of us, not just romantically, but professionally. Kelly had the academic credentials and the eye for authentic pieces, had the business instincts and the connections for my father's brief stint in estate sales. Together, we were unstoppable, We started Shaw and Schmidt Fine Arts in Kelly's studio apartment, authenticating pieces for insurance companies and small collectors. Our first major break came when I identified a genuine Picasso sketch in an estate sale hidden behind a frame containing a worthless reproduction. The commission from that single sale let us rent our first gallery space in Millbrook Heights Arts District. For 5 beautiful years, we were partners in everything. Kelly would identify promising pieces, and I would handle the acquisitions and client relationships. She taught me to see the subtle differences between authentic brushwork and clever forgeries. I taught her how to read people, how to know when a seller was desperate enough to accept a lowball offer or confident enough to demand top dollar. We married in our 3rd year of business, a small ceremony in the gallery surrounded by the paintings we'd fallen in love with together. Kelly wore a vintage dress that complemented the Monet water lilies hanging behind the altar. I remember thinking that life couldn't possibly get more perfect. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But perfection, I learned, makes some people uncomfortable, especially my twin brother Blake. Blake had always resented my success, but he'd managed to build his own consulting firm, Stone Strategic Investments, so I thought he'd finally found his own path. I was wrong. Blake didn't want his own path. He wanted mine. He wanted everything I had, starting with my wife. The first sign came during our 4th year of marriage. Blake had started showing up at gallery events uninvited, always dressed impeccably, always armed with impressive knowledge about whatever artists we were featuring. He'd position himself near Kelly during cocktail hours, engaging her in deep conversations about art theory while I handled potential buyers. "Your brother is so intellectually stimulating," Kelly mentioned one evening after a particularly successful opening. "He has such interesting perspectives on postmodern influences in contemporary work." I should have seen the warning signs then. The way Kelly's eyes lit up when discussing Blake's theories. How she started quoting his opinions about market trends. The subtle shift from Grant thinks to Blake says in her everyday conversation. But I was too busy building our empire to notice I was losing my empress. The business continued to thrive. We moved to the penthouse. We acquired increasingly prestigious pieces. Kelly earned recognition as one of the country's leading experts in authentication. I negotiated deals that put us in the same league as Sotheby's and Christie's for certain categories of artwork. And through it all, Blake circled like a shark, sensing blood in the water. He started investing in art himself, always asking Kelly for advice, always finding excuses to meet her for coffee to discuss potential acquisitions. When I expressed concern, Kelly brushed it off as professional networking. "Blake is family," she said, with that patience reserved for explaining obvious things to slow people. "Of course I'm going to help him succeed, besides his investments are good for the whole art market." The final betrayal unfolded over 18 months in my previous life. Blake became a silent partner in 3 of our major acquisitions, providing funding that allowed us to bid on pieces we couldn't otherwise afford. In return, he wanted insider knowledge about market trends and upcoming opportunities. Kelly, brilliant at reading art but naive about reading people, shared everything with him. Detailed client lists, authentication reports, our entire business strategy for the coming year. I found out about the affair by accident, or rather, by death. In my previous life, the stress of building the business while fighting off Blake's increasing interference had taken its toll on my health. I'd started having chest pains, episodes of dizziness, but I ignored them. There was always another acquisition to pursue, another client dinner to attend. The heart attack came during what should have been our triumph the night. We acquired a previously unknown Van Gogh sketch for $28 million. While I was in the cardiac ICU fighting for my life, Kelly and Blake were in our penthouse bed, celebrating their successful theft of my life's work. I discovered the affair when I came home 3 days early from my recovery, hoping to surprise Kelly with news that the doctors had cleared me to return to work. Instead, I found surprise of a different kind. My wife and my brother on our Italian leather sofa, surrounded by legal documents that would transfer my shares in Shaw and Schmidt to Blake's investment company. The confrontation was swift and brutal. Blake didn't even have the grace to look ashamed. "You always were too trusting, brother," he said, not bothering to put on his shirt as he gathered the contracts. "Kelly and I have been planning this for over a year. Face it, too built something beautiful, but you were never ruthless enough to protect it." Kelly at least had the decency to cry. But her tears were for the inconvenience of being caught, not for the man she was destroying. "I never meant for it to happen this way," she whispered. "But Blake understands the business better than you do. He has vision where you just have sentiment." The divorce was a massacre. Blake had used his inside knowledge to systematically document every business decision I'd made that could be characterized as financially irresponsible. Kelly testified that I'd been mentally unstable since my heart attack, making erratic choices. That threatened the gallery's future. They took everything: the gallery, the penthouse, even the rights to the Shaw and Schmidt name. Was left with a studio apartment and enough money to last 6 months if I was careful. I lasted 3 months and 12 days. The second heart attack came while I was watching the evening news. Coverage of Blake and Kelly's engagement party held in what used to be our gallery, surrounded by art I'd spent 5 years acquiring. But as I lay dying on the cheap carpet of that studio apartment, watching my life's work become their victory celebration, I felt something beyond pain or betrayal. I felt rage. Pure, crystalline rage that burned so hot it seemed to stop my heart from giving up entirely. And then I woke up in our penthouse. 7 years earlier, with Kelly shaking me awake from what she thought was a nightmare. "Grant, sweetheart, you were thrashing around. Are you okay?" I looked at her concerned face, so young, so beautiful, so utterly convincing in her apparent love for me, and smiled. "Just a bad dream," I said. "But I'm awake now." This time I was going to stay awake the morning. After our anniversary dinner, I woke with the kind of clarity that only comes from having died once before. Kelly was already Ghanaian, early meeting with a potential client, she'd claimed. Though I knew she was really coordinating the final details of their betrayal with Blake, her absence gave me exactly what I needed: time to begin my transformation. I started where any good strategist begins, with intelligence gathering. While Kelly thought she was playing chess, she was actually moving pieces on a board I'd already memorized. Every move Blake would make, every lie Kelly would tell, every legal maneuver they'd attempt, lived through it all before. But this time, I had an advantage they couldn't possibly anticipate. I knew their endgame. More importantly, I knew their weakness. Blake's Achilles heel wasn't greed or ambition. It was his desperate need to prove he was better than me at everything. In our previous life, even after he'd stolen my wife and my business, he'd still felt compelled to rub my nose in his victory. That need for superiority would be his downfall, because it made him predictable. And Blake's greatest source of pride? The trophy he flaunted whenever he wanted to demonstrate his superiority over me was his engagement to Beatrice Croft. I'd done my research on Beatrice during my recovery from that first heart attack, when I had nothing but time and bitterness. She was everything Kelly wasn't: genuinely brilliant instead of merely clever, authentically passionate about art instead of seeing it as a means to wealth, and most importantly, loyal to those who earned her trust. Beatrice Croft was the senior curator of contemporary arts at the Metropolitan Museum, a position she'd earned through 15 years of groundbreaking scholarship and innovative exhibitions. She'd grown up in poverty, raised by a grandmother who cleaned office buildings to pay for Beatrice's education. Every achievement in her life had been earned. Through merit and determination, Blake had pursued her like a hunter stalking exotic prey, using every advantage his wealth and connections could provide. He'd donated $500,000 to the Met's acquisition fund to get her attention, then leveraged that donation into invitations to exclusive gallery openings where he could demonstrate his sophisticated appreciation for contemporary art. In my previous life, I'd watched their courtship from afar with a mixture of pity and contempt. Beatrice deserved so much better than Blake's calculated seduction campaign, but she seemed genuinely happy with him. I'd assumed she was just another woman taken in by my brother's superficial charm. I was wrong about that. 2. That first morning of my new life, I made a phone call that would change everything. Metropolitan Museum of Art, Contemporary Arts Department. Morning. I'd like to speak with Beatrice Croft regarding a potential donation of a significant contemporary piece. May I ask who's calling? Paused for just a moment, considering the weight of what I was about to do. This is Emmett Vance. I represent a private collector who wishes to remain anonymous for now. Emmett Vance was an identity I'd carefully constructed during my previous life's bitter aftermath, a pseudonym I'd used for small art purchases when I couldn't bear to use the Shaw name anymore. But now Emmett Vance was going to become something much more important. He was going to become the man who would steal Blake's perfect life. Mr. Vance. Beatrice's voice was crisp and professional when she came on the line, but I could hear the underlying warmth that Blake had found so attractive. I understand you have a contemporary piece you're considering donating. Not exactly, I said, allowing Emmett's persona to take shape and my voice slightly deeper than Grant's, with the hint of a European accent I'd picked up during a summer study in Florence. I represent a collector who's been following your work for several years. Your exhibition on political resistance in modern street art was particularly illuminating. There was a pause. That exhibition had been Beatrice's passion project, a controversial show that had generated significant criticism from traditionalist art circles. Most donors avoided mentioning it. You're familiar with the Voices from the Margins exhibition? She asked, her professional reserve shifting to genuine interest. Intimately. The way you contextualize Banksy's work within the broader framework of anti-establishment artistic expression was brilliant. Most curators would have focused on the market value of the pieces rather than their socio-political significance. Another pause, longer this time. Mr. Vance, I have to ask, most donors contact our development office, not the curatorial staff directly. And they certainly don't lead with discussions of controversial exhibition theory. I smiled. This was exactly the opening I'd hoped for. It's Croft, I'm not most donors. And this isn't exactly a typical donation conversation. My client is interested in commissioning a new exhibition, one that would showcase the intersection of authentic artistic expression and commercial manipulation in the contemporary art market. That's a very specific concept, my client believes. That too much of what passes for cutting-edge contemporary art is actually carefully manufactured product, designed to appeal to wealthy collectors who mistake price for value. He wants to sponsor an exhibition that would expose the difference between genuine artistic innovation and market-driven forgery. I could practically hear her mind working. This was exactly the kind of project that would appeal to someone with Beatrice's academic integrity and social consciousness. Mr. Vance, this sounds fascinating, but I have to ask, why approach me specifically? There are several curators who specialize in contemporary market analysis. Because, I said, allowing a note of admiration to creep into Emmett's voice, you're the only curator in the city who's proven she can't be bought? Your rejection of the Whitmore Foundation's attempt to influence your exhibition choices last year made quite an impression in certain circles. That was a detail only someone with deep connections in the art world would know. The Whitmore Foundation had offered to fund Beatrice's next exhibition in exchange for featuring pieces from their private collection, pieces that Beatrice had determined were of questionable authenticity. Her public rejection of their offer had cost the Met significant funding, but it earned her respect among serious scholars. I think, Beatrice said slowly, we should meet in person to discuss this further. I was hoping you'd say that. Are you free for coffee this afternoon? I know a place in Soho that's quiet enough for serious conversation. Actually, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice, I was planning to visit the Guggenheims. New acquisition this afternoon. Would you be interested in viewing it together? Nothing tests someone's artistic sensibilities like seeing how they react to challenging new work. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Ms. Croft, I said, I think this is going to be the beginning of a very productive partnership. As I hung up the phone, I caught sight of myself in the mirror across the room. Grant Shaw looked the same as always, Blake's identical twin, Kelly's devoted husband. The trusting fool who'd built an empire only to hand it over to his betrayers. But behind Grant's familiar features, I could see someone else emerging. Someone harder, smarter, more dangerous. Someone who knew that the best revenge wasn't destruction, was taking everything the other person valued and making it your own. Kelly and Blake thought they were playing a game they'd already won. They had no idea the game had changed entirely. By the time I met Beatrice at the Guggenheim that afternoon, Emmett Vance would be ready to begin his courtship of the one woman Blake Stone believed was completely beyond my reach. After all, Blake had spent months convincing himself that he'd won Beatrice through his superior sophistication and charm. It would never occur to him that his identical twin, the sentimental brother he'd always seen as inferior, could become someone capable of taking her away. That was going to make his defeat so much sweeter. 3 weeks into my double life, the first signs of Blake and Kelly's carefully constructed plan began to unravel in ways they never could have anticipated. While they were busy positioning themselves for the perfect betrayal, I was systematically dismantling everything they thought they knew about their own game. The catalyst came during what should have been Blake's moment of triumph, the Millbrook Heights Contemporary Arts Gala, where he planned to publicly announce his business partnership with Kelly and their joint acquisition of several high-profile pieces. It was meant to be the opening move in their campaign to marginalize me from my own gallery, positioning them as the sophisticated power couple who truly understood the art world. Instead, it became the night Blake discovered he was no longer the only Shaw brother who could command a room. I arrived at the gala as Grant Shaw, playing my role as the devoted husband accompanying Kelly to yet another networking event. But 30 minutes into the evening, Emmett Vance made his entrance. The transformation wasn't just cosmetic, though I'd been meticulous about that too. The European-cut dinner jacket that costs more than most people's monthly salary. The subtle changes to my posture and mannerisms that years of observing Blake's affected sophistication had taught me. Even the barely detectable accent that made me sound like someone who'd spent significant time in Florence's art restoration workshops. But the real change was deeper. Emmett Vance moved through the gallery with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged in these circles not because of family connections or business success, but because of genuine expertise and authentic passion. Emmett. Beatrice's face lit up when she spotted me across the crowded exhibition space. I didn't realize you'd be here tonight. 3 weeks of coffee meetings, gallery visits, and increasingly intimate conversations about art and life had established Emmett Vance as the most interesting man Beatrice had met in years. Someone who could discuss the technical aspects of contemporary sculpture restoration with the same enthusiasm he brought to debates about the commercialization of street art. Someone who listened to her ideas about curatorial innovation instead of trying to impress her with his own accomplishments. Someone completely unlike her. Fiancée Blake Stone. Wouldn't miss it, I said, allowing my gaze to sweep appreciatively across the exhibition. Though I have to say, some of these authentication decisions are ... questionable. Beatrice followed my look toward a supposedly authentic Jackson Pollock that I knew from my previous life's painful experience was actually a sophisticated forgery. Blake had been the one to authenticate it for the gallery's insurance company, accepting a substantial fee despite clear evidence of fraudulent provenance. "You think it's fake?" Beatrice asked, stepping closer to examine the piece. "Look at the paint layering in the upper right quadrant," I said, my voice low enough that our conversation remained private. Pollock's technique involved specific rhythmic patterns that reflected his physical movements during creation. This piece shows hesitation marks places, where the forger paused to calculate the next drip pattern instead of following genuine artistic impulse. Beatrice studied the painting with new eyes, her expression growing more troubled as she spotted the telltale signs I'd pointed out. "My God, you're right. How did this get past authentication?" Before I could answer, a familiar voice cut through. Our conversation like a blade. "Beatrice. Darling, there you are." Blake materialized beside us, his practiced smile faltering slightly when he saw me. "Grant, I didn't expect to see you here." "Where's Kelly?" "Networking," I replied icily, maintaining Grant Shaw's familiar mannerisms even as I noted Blake's obvious discomfort at finding his fiancée deep in conversation with a sophisticated stranger. "Blake, I'd like you to meet Emmett Vance." "Emmett, this is my brother Blake Stone." Blake's relief was palpable. Just Grant's eccentric acquaintance, not a threat to his carefully maintained image as the cultured Shaw brother. He extended his hand with renewed confidence. "Any friend of Grant's," Blake said, his tone carrying just a hint of condescension. "Are you in the art business, Mr. Vance?" "Consultant," I replied, shaking his hand with exactly the right amount of firmness. "I help private collectors verify authenticity and assess market value." Actually, Beatrice and I were just discussing some concerning irregularities in this supposed Pollock. Blake's face went pale. He'd been the one to authenticate that piece. And he knew exactly how much fraudulent documentation had been involved. "Irregularities?" He managed. "Paint layering inconsistencies," Beatrice said, her professional integrity overriding any consideration for Blake's comfort. "Emmett's identified several technical markers that suggest forgery. We should probably alert the gallery's insurance company." I watched Blake's carefully constructed evening crumble in real time. If that Pollock was revealed as fake, it would trigger an investigation into his authentication business. An investigation would reveal the network of forged provenance documents he'd been using to manipulate the market for months. "Perhaps we shouldn't jump to conclusions," Blake said desperately. "Authentication is a complex process. Sometimes apparent irregularities have perfectly innocent explanations." Of course, I agreed, my tone reasonable. Though in my experience, when multiple technical markers align to suggest forgery, innocent explanations become statistically unlikely. The conversation was interrupted by Kelly's arrival, her face flushed with excitement from her networking triumphs.
"Blake,
I've been looking everywhere for you. The Rothschild Foundation is interested in our proposal for the Contemporary Acquisition Fund." And she stopped mid-sentence when she noticed me talking with Blake and Beatrice. "Grant, what are you doing over here?" Her voice carried a note of suspicion that she couldn't quite hide. "Just enjoying the exhibition," I said mildly. Blake was introducing me to his fiancée. "Beatrice Croft. Meet my wife, Kelly Schmidt." The introduction should have been routine, but I caught the flicker of something unexpected in Kelly's eyes when she looked at Beatrice. Not just the polite assessment one successful woman gives another, but something sharper. Something that looked almost like guilt. "Miss Schmidt," Beatrice said politely. "Blake's mentioned your work in art authentication. Your paper on Renaissance forgery techniques was groundbreaking." Kelly's response was unusually flustered. "Thank you, though. I'm sure my work seems pedestrian compared to what you accomplish at the Metropolitan." There was something wrong with this interaction. Something that didn't match what I knew about Kelly's usual confident professionalism. In my previous life, Kelly had always been eager to discuss her academic achievements with other art professionals. Tonight she seemed almost ... evasive, and then it hit me. The timeline I'd been reconstructing in my mind had a gap, a period in Kelly's recent activities that I hadn't been able to account for. She'd claimed to be researching acquisition opportunities, but her usual sources had no record of her inquiries, unless she'd been researching something else entirely. "Beatrice," I said carefully, "didn't you mention that you'd been having problems with someone questioning your authentication procedures? Something about anonymous complaints to the museum board?" Beatrice's expression darkened. "Yes, it's been incredibly frustrating. Someone's been sending detailed criticisms of my curatorial decisions to board members, questioning my competence and suggesting that I'm too ... idealistic for serious museum work." I felt the pieces clicking into place. With terrible clarity, "Anonymous complaints, you said? Completely anonymous? But whoever's writing them has detailed knowledge of museum politics and art market dynamics. It has to be someone with professional expertise and inside knowledge of my work." Blake had gone completely white. Kelly was staring at her hands, her face carefully blank. In my previous life, Blake's campaign to win Beatrice had been purely seductive, expensive dinners. Impressive donations, carefully orchestrated displays of sophistication. But this time, with his timeline accelerated by their plan to betray me, he'd apparently decided to take a more direct approach, undermine Beatrice's confidence in her own professional judgment, make her doubt her instincts and rely more heavily on his guidance. Classic manipulation tactics that would make her more dependent on his support and validation. The same tactics he'd used on Kelly during their affair. "That's terrible," I said, injecting exactly the right amount of sympathetic outrage into my voice. Professional sabotage of that kind is particularly insidious because it's designed to make the victim question their own competence. Exactly, Beatrice said, grateful for the understanding. Psychological warfare dressed up as professional critique. Blake cleared his throat uncomfortably. Perhaps we should focus on more pleasant topics. This is supposed to be a celebration after all, but Kelly wasn't listening to Blake anymore. She was staring at Beatrice with an expression I recognized. The look she got when she was working through a complex authentication problem. All the pieces were finally falling into place. Anonymous complaints, Kelly repeated slowly. Professional expertise, inside knowledge. She turned to look at Blake, and for the first time since I'd known her, Kelly Schmidt looked at my brother without any trace of admiration or affection. She looked at him like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. Blake, she said quietly, we need to talk. The aftermath of that gala conversation unfolded faster than even I had anticipated. Within 48 hours, Blake's carefully constructed world began collapsing with the kind of spectacular implosion that only comes when someone's own weapons are turned against them. It started with Kelly's investigation into the anonymous complaints against Beatrice. Armed with her doctoral-level expertise in forgery detection, Kelly approached the problem like she would any authentication challenge, by examining the evidence until the truth became undeniable. The writing style, the insider knowledge, the timing of each complaint, everything pointed to someone with intimate access to both. Beatrice's work and Blake's strategic thinking. Someone who knew exactly which of Beatrice's curatorial decisions could be twisted to sound irresponsible or naive. Someone like Blake himself. You manipulative bastard. Kelly's voice carried through the thin walls of Blake's downtown office when she confronted him. I know because I was there not as Grant Shaw, but as Emmett Vance, arriving for a scheduled meeting with Beatrice about the exhibition we'd been planning. The timing wasn't coincidental. Kelly, you're being hysterical. Blake's voice was strained. Why would I undermine my own fiancée? 'Cause that's what you do, Kelly shot back. You find people's weaknesses and exploit them. You did it to Grant. You've been doing it to me. And you've been doing it to Beatrice. The only difference is that now I can see the pattern. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I watched Blake's face cycle through denial, anger, and finally the cold calculation I knew so well. This was the moment he would either try to manipulate Kelly back into compliance or cut his losses and abandon her entirely. Fine, he said, his voice taking on the flat, emotionless tone I remembered from our final confrontation in my previous life. You want the truth? Beatrice was getting too confident, too independent. She needed to remember who really has the power in this relationship. Kelly stared at him with something approaching horror. You've been systematically destroying her. Self-confidence. The woman you claim to love. Love. Blake laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. Beatrice is a trophy, Kelly. A beautiful, accomplished trophy that proves I can have anything Grant could never dream of. Just like this business partnership of ours proves I'm the better Shaw brother. That was the moment Kelly finally understood. What I'd known all along, Blake didn't want to build anything. He only wanted to take things away from me. And what am I in this grand strategy of yours? Kelly asked quietly. Blake shrugged. You were useful. Your expertise gave me credibility. Your connections opened doors, and having Grant's wife on my side was ... satisfying. But honestly, Kelly, you're starting to bore me. I had to admire Kelly's composure. In my previous life, Blake's casual cruelty had destroyed her immediately. This time, she simply nodded. Then I suppose we're done here, she said. I'll have my lawyer contact you about dissolving our business. Arrangements. You can't, Blake said quickly. The contracts. The contracts you had me sign under false pretenses. The ones based on forged authentication documents and fraudulent financial projections. Kelly smiled coldly. Blake, I may have been naive about human nature, but I'm not stupid about business law. As Kelly walked out, she passed Beatrice and me in the hallway. The look she gave me was complex, part recognition, part gratitude, part rueful acknowledgement. That she'd been played by someone far more skilled than Blake could ever be. Mr. Vance, she said quietly, take good care of her. Beatrice looked between us, confused. Kelly, what's going on? Ask your fiancés, Kelly said. Though I suspect Emmett here could explain it just as well. With that bombshell hanging in the air, Kelly disappeared into the elevator, leaving Beatrice and me alone in the hallway outside Blake's office. Emmett, Beatrice said slowly, there's something you haven't told me, isn't there? I could have. Lead. I could have maintained Emmett Vance's cover and let events unfold naturally. But looking at Beatrice, brilliant, principled, genuinely kind Beatrice, I realized she deserved better than another deception. Yes, I said simply. There's a great deal I haven't told you, including who you really are. I nodded. It isn't Emmett Vance. It's Grant Shaw. Blake is my twin brother. Kelly is my wife, and everything you think you know about both of them is built on lies they've been telling for months. Beatrice stared at me for a long moment. Then, to my amazement, she started laughing. You know what's funny? She said. I think I've been falling in love with you for weeks and I didn't even know your real name. And now that you do? She stepped closer, her eyes bright with something that looked remarkably like relief. Now, I know why Blake always seemed like such a pale imitation of the man I really wanted to be with. The kiss that followed was nothing like the calculated seduction Blake had used to win her. It was honest, passionate, and completely genuine. Everything Blake could never be. When we broke apart, Beatrice rested her forehead against mine. So what happens now, Grant Shaw? I said, we give Blake exactly what he's always wanted, the chance to see which Shaw brother really is superior. Because the final phase of my plan was just beginning, Blake had lost Kelly, but he still had his business, his reputation, and his engagement to Beatrice. Taking those away from him wouldn't require manipulation or deception. It would just require giving him enough rope to hang himself with. 6 months later, I stood in the garden of our countryside estate, watching Beatrice arrange flowers from her own greenhouse. She wore a simple white dress that made her look luminous in the morning sunlight. When she caught me staring, her smile was radiant with the kind of joy that only comes from being genuinely loved and appreciated. What? Stop looking at me like that, she laughed, or we'll never finish preparing for the reception. Today was the launch of Beatrice's new exhibition, Authentic Voices, Truth and Deception in Contemporary Art. It was the project we'd conceived during those early conversations as Emmett and Beatrice. But it had evolved into something far more meaningful, a groundbreaking examination of how market manipulation corrupts artistic integrity. The centerpiece of the exhibition was a case study featuring Blake's authentication fraud network, which had been exposed when the insurance investigation into that forged Pollock triggered a federal investigation. Blake was now serving a 5-year sentence for wire fraud and money laundering. His reputation in ruins, his consulting firm bankrupt. Kelly had testified against him. Her expertise crucial in demonstrating the sophisticated nature of his forgery operation. In exchange for her cooperation, she'd received immunity and had used the experience to launch her own forensic authentication consultancy. She was doing well professionally and personally. Last month, she'd started dating a professor from Columbia who appreciated her brilliant mind and respected her work. Grant, Beatrice called, interrupting my thoughts. Your parents just arrived. I looked toward the driveway where my mother and father were climbing out of their car, looking older but somehow more peaceful than I remembered. Learning the truth about Blake's manipulations had been devastating for them, but it had also freed them from the exhausting task of enabling his destructive behavior. How are you feeling about seeing them? Beatrice asked softly. Good, I said, and realized I meant it. I've forgiven them. They were manipulated just like the rest of us. The truth was, I'd found something far more valuable than revenge. I'd found peace. The rage that had once consumed me, the bitterness that had literally killed me in my previous life, had been replaced by genuine contentment. As the reception began, I moved through our home with Beatrice by my side, greeting colleagues and friends who celebrated her work and our happiness. There was no trace of the desperate, trusting man who'd built an empire only to hand it over to his betrayers. That Grant Shaw was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more content. Near the end of the evening, I found myself on the terrace overlooking our garden. The city lights of Millbrook Heights twinkled in the distance, the same view I'd once had from the penthouse I'd shared with Kelly, but it felt like looking at a completely different world. Any regrets? Beatrice asked, joining me at the railing. Considered the question seriously. In my previous life, I would have regretted not fighting harder, not seeing the signs earlier, not being ruthless enough to protect what was mine. But those regrets had led to bitterness, which had led to death. None, I said finally. Every betrayal led me to you. Every loss taught me what actually mattered. Even Blake's cruelty served a purpose, showed me who I didn't want to become. Beatrice smiled, slipping her hand into mine. You know what I realized today? Blake never understood that he'd already lost. Even when he thought he was winning, he was just proving that he could only take things, never build them. But you, ... Yeah. You took the worst thing that ever happened to you and turned it into the foundation for something beautiful. Blake had spent his entire life trying to prove he was superior to me, never realizing that superiority can't be stolen, it has to be earned. He'd taken my wife, my business, even my name, but he'd never been able to take my ability to create, to love, to choose forgiveness over revenge. Besides, Beatrice added with a mischievous smile, I think I got the better Shaw brother. I laughed, pulling her closer. You got the only Shaw brother who ever learned that the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's building a life so beautiful that they become irrelevant. As we stood together in the garden we'd planted, surrounded by the home we'd created, planning the future we'd build together, I felt something I'd never experienced in my previous life, complete and perfect peace. Blake had wanted to prove he was better than me. Instead, he'd given me the gift of becoming better than I'd ever thought possible. And that, I realized, was the sweetest victory of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't. Want to pass these up? Just click and check them out. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.